name is Tracy Burgess. I am the CEO here at the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute. We are thrilled to be partnering with the Bermuda National Trust for this evening's event. I would like to acknowledge His Excellency, the Governor Andrew Murdoch, who's attending this evening, as well as Karen Border, the Executive Director of the Bermuda National Trust, along with her team, and the Chair of the Bermuda National Trust, Mr. Mark Orchard, and our very special guest this evening, Mr. Hampton Sides. Can we give a round of applause to the special guest? Thank you. So this evening's talk, in partnership with the Trust, is actually BUEI's finale event. It's our closeout of a weekend's long worth of activities and special events that we hosted in celebration of World Ocean Day. And this theme for this evening's talk, with the life and death of Captain Cook re-explored, fits very well not only with BUEI's mission, but also with developing and nurturing an appreciation for the ocean. So with that said, I'm going to invite Karen Border to the stage to introduce our special guest for this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this evening to hear Hampton Sides talk about the final fateful voyage of Captain James Cook. Now, as so often happens in Bermuda, tonight's talk came about through friends of friends. I received a phone call from a Bermudian friend of Mr. Sides, Sarah Cook. Cook with an E, no relation. And she said that Mr. Sides was going to be visiting Bermuda with his wife, Anne, and would the Bermuda National Trust be interested in having him speak? To which I said, absolutely, because I'd just finished reading his fabulous book about Captain Cook, The Wide, Wide Sea, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then, knowing that there would be a lot of interest in having a best-selling author come to talk about his latest work on such a fascinating topic, we decided to reach out to BUEI so that we could invite more Bermudians to come and listen to the talk tonight. So we were thrilled to collaborate with BUEI on the use of the auditorium here. And the timing, so close to World Oceans Day, was also absolutely appropriate. Couldn't have been better timed. So Hampton Sides. He is an acclaimed American historian and journalist. He's the author of Hellhound on His Trail, Ghost Soldiers, Blood and Thunder, In the Kingdom of Ice, On Desperate Ground, and other best-selling works of narrative history. He is editor-at-large for Outside magazine and has written for such periodicals as National Geographic, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, Smithsonian, and The Washington Post. Mr. Sides has a BA in history from Yale, and he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Colorado College in 2017. He was an Edwards Media Fellow at Stanford University and is a member of the Society of American Historians. He's lectured at universities, museums, and writers' conferences all over America and abroad, and appeared as a guest on such national broadcasts as the Today Show and the History Channel. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have him here in Bermuda to speak to us about his most recent book, The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook, which was published just last year. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for Hampton Sides.
Thank you, thank you. Wow, what a pleasure to be here in this full hall in Bermuda, a place that Captain Cook actually, I did a little research on this today. He never came here, unfortunately. He did not, but many of his sailors on his ship came through here, or in case of one of them, actually on this ship, the Resolution, was on the third and final voyage. A guy named Tom Roberts. Unfortunately, he died on the voyage of a condition known as dropsy, which I'm not sure what that is. I think it's perhaps a stroke. But on that sad note, we will begin our lecture. No, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction and the invitation to speak out here in the middle of the wide, wide Atlantic, and to talk about one of the great explorers of all time. This was an explorer who was more interested in what was going on above the ocean, not underwater, like Jacques Cousteau or something. But his voyages, I've been thinking, what if they had had scuba gear back during this time? It would have been that much more of an extraordinary voyage. But thank you so much for being such gracious hosts. We've had a wonderful 4 or 5 days now here in lovely Bermuda with the Cook family, Cook with an E. Wonderful, wonderful hosts. So yeah, we're going to talk today a little bit about Captain Cook and his final voyage around the world, but also about my voyage, often with my wonderful wife Anne, in sort of pursuit of Captain Cook, try to understand, and we went to as many of these stops as we possibly could, often during a time of COVID, so just a little bit about how this came about, and I say this a little bit facetiously, but because Captain Cook had been on my wavelength and on my radar for a long time, I've been curious about him. But there came a point where my wife said, you go to a lot of weird places for your books. Why don't you pick a book that involves travel to some places that we'd want to go to? And I very quickly got back to her and said, well, how about Captain Cook? And she's like, where'd he go? And it was like Tonga, Tahiti, Hawaii, Alaska, Vancouver Island, New Zealand, and so forth and so on. So she agreed it was a good topic, but it was just a topic. It wasn't a story yet. I had to narrow it down, and I decided to write about his final voyage, his most dramatic voyage. I would say his longest voyage in terms of both nautical miles and duration, and the most American of his voyages, in a sense. As an American historian, as someone who has primarily American readership, I wanted a story that had that quality. They left in July of 1776. Much of the action takes place in Oregon, or off the coast of Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, and of course, a lot of it happens right here in Hawaii. So this is how I stumbled on this story, and it has taken me literally around the world, and both in terms of the research, but also in terms of talking about the book, and even here in the middle of the Atlantic and in lovely Bermuda. So let's dim the lights if we can. So Captain Cook, James Cook, is often mistaken, at least in the United States, for a lot of other captains, real and imaginary. I thought everyone knew who Captain Cook was, but apparently not. I think the governor here knows all about Captain Cook. I hear he's a sailor and knows a lot about a lot of these details. But in America, I kept getting confusion. Like, oh, you're writing about the guy with the, Captain Hook, the pirate. Or, how's the book? You're writing about Star Trek, Captain Kirk, or Captain Kidd, or Captain Crunch. Any of these different captains. People in America don't quite know who he is, and I have to remind them. He was one of, I argue in the book, I think the greatest nautical explorer of all time. And I say that based on the sheer number of miles he traveled, the quality of his observations and publications, the accuracy and precision of his maps, the just sheer number of first contact experiences that he and his officers had and documented with cultures around the world. And I know the Spanish and the Portuguese and the French and a lot of other European nations produced great explorers. So did, by the way, the Polynesians, and so did many other cultures. But I don't know that there's anyone who published so much amazing stuff and sort of spread knowledge around the world in such a profound way as Captain Cook with his 3 around the world voyages. So talk a little bit about him. This is the last, and I think the very best portrait we have of Captain Cook, which was painted in 1776, shortly before he left on this voyage. You see his intensity, you see his severity. He was just not probably an easy man to get along with. He was from Yorkshire, he was tough, he was someone who was a person of very few words. He was Quaker trained. He was someone who inspired a lot of loyalty, inspired a lot of, a little bit of fear in his men. But what he primarily was, and I think this kind of captures it, is he was a cartographer. He was a map maker. He was someone who used the tools of his day to produce these astonishingly accurate maps around the world, wherever he went. And he often did it with, very crude tools, we would say today. And yet these maps are almost shockingly, almost chillingly accurate. If you superimpose a satellite image of say, Newfoundland, one of the places that he mapped, on his maps, you get this, it's just exactly accurate. And how did he do it? It's just one of his skills. So that kind of precision and almost scientific rigor that he brought to cartography, he also brought to all the other aspects of being a captain, whether it was diet or hygiene or just basic navigation. This kind of scientific aspect was what he brought to his travels. This is like the more formal portrait of Captain Cook. This is a portrait that you can see at the Greenwich Museum in England, with the wig and all the formal accoutrements of exploration. So people ask, where did Captain Cook go? And I always say the better question is, where didn't he go? He did not go to Bermuda, unfortunately, but he went just about everywhere, particularly in the southern Pacific, in the southern seas. And because he went to all these places, and because he created these incredibly accurate maps, which were then published widely in these beautiful volumes that became best-selling books all around the world, certainly all around Europe. He essentially broadcast to the world the exact locations of all of these societies, all these islands that had lived in splendid isolation for hundreds of years, perhaps millennia. And that's why he's pretty controversial today. Captain Cook statues are coming down everywhere. Even as I was researching and writing this book, Captain Cook's statues were being vandalized and ripped down and hurled into the sea, which made me kind of wonder, is this good? Is this good for my project? Should I just cancel it, just like he's being canceled from history? Or should I continue on? And I decided the latter, obviously. The fact that he was controversial, the fact that he's in the news again, I decided was very good for my project because it meant that he is current. There is something about this bewigged guy in the tricorn hat who traveled the world, who is got a pulse still. People care about him. He gets people worked up, good, bad, or indifferent. They care about him, and I get into the controversy in the book. I try to understand where it's coming from. I don't agree with a lot of it, but I agree with some of it. So I show you this to kind of give you the backdrop of what's happening with not only Cook, but all the colonial explorers and the sort of the reassessment that we have seen going on around the world about conquistadors and about colonialism and imperialism, invasive species, and so many other issues that really are intimately connected with Captain Cook's voyages. This is what it looked like the day that I visited the site of Captain Cook's death. They don't like him. Even the place where they hacked him to pieces and bashed him to death on the shores of the Big Island. Oh, darn it. I just gave away the ending of the book. But most of you know that he did die a very violent and very graphic death on the Big Island. And this was what it looked at like that day when we hiked down. They just splattered it with red paint. There's a very vibrant, a very strident sovereignty movement on the Big Island. And, you know, this is part of that argument. That's part of that great kind of narrative that's going on. It was like, we got to get rid of the explorers and we got to not get rid of these statues because this is colonialism at its essence. So anyway, I show you these just to give you a little bit of context and background. So Captain Cook was famous for all kinds of reasons, and his voyages were significant for all kinds of reasons. But I'm just going to kind of scroll through a few of them, starting with the chronometer, which his second voyage around the world and his third had the benefit of. This amazing tool, which you can see at the Greenwich Museum, which told longitude. It's basically a seagoing clock. I call it kind of like the iPod of nautical exploration that told the exact time in Greenwich, England, and that in turn gave Captain Cook his understanding of longitude, which was the hard thing that they've been trying to figure out for decades, centuries. And so this is why his maps were so accurate. You know, for the first time, he could tell you wherever he was around the world, the exact locations, the exact coordinates. And this meant that now, when he found something, he could put it on a map. And then the next people who came along could exactly find it again. And this accelerated the whole colonial process. This is the K1. It was the Kindle. It's called the Kindle. And it was based on something by Harrison. But you can see this a chronometer in the Greenwich Museum. Any of you been there, by the way?
Yeah.
Like a lot of you, okay. A nautical crowd here tonight, understandably. So Captain Cook was also believed to be the first explorer, certainly the first European explorer to cross the Antarctic Circle. He went way down there in his first and second voyages, looking for this massive supercontinent that was said to be down there by the leading scientists and philosophers of his day. There was this idea that the preponderance of land masses in the northern hemisphere meant that there has to be an equal and opposite preponderance of land masses in the southern hemisphere, or else the planet would be top heavy and would wobble out into space, and it would be tragic and catastrophic. So this was the state of the science of that time, but the leading theorists said it was this huge thing, much bigger than Antarctica, much bigger than Australia. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, and they sent Cook down there to find it. He didn't find it. He found a lot of icebergs and penguins, but he proved that it didn't exist, and he became what was known as a hero of negative discovery, and not finding the thing that was widely presumed to be there. So that's one of his firsts. Another first here is, I'm sorry, it's a nautical tale. I know dinner is coming, but we have to talk a little bit about scurvy, the horrible disease that was considered almost an occupational hazard that the crowns of the various navies were willing to tolerate for these long distance voyages. As many as half of the sailors would die of this horrible disease that, you know, your gums receded and your teeth fell out and you had these horrible sores all over your body, and it was this horrible, horrible way to die. And so many, like millions, truly millions of sailors died of this disease. Captain Cook's voyages were the first long-distance voyages where not a single man died of scurvy. And it's not exactly that Captain Cook understood its cause, which is a deficiency of vitamin C, but he did understand that it was intimately tied to fresh food, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, and he made his men, often against their will, eat their vegetables, eat their broccoli, and it saved their lives. And the Admiralty back in London thought he had truly conquered scurvy. So that's another of Cook's firsts. So there's all sorts of firsts that come out of his voyages too. First descriptions of things, like our first description of the hula dance or the haka dance in New Zealand, or the concept of taboo in Polynesia. We also get our first description of the sport of surfing. And this is a very early photograph of Captain Cook. People don't realize, in addition to being a great map maker and all these other things, he was a badass surfer. Cook's men could not believe this sport when they encountered it in Tahiti, and then specifically on the Big Island of Hawaii. They just couldn't believe that these guys did this, guys and women too, that they would go out and get on these big boards and sail across the water like this. It was otherworldly almost, because most of the sailors, including Captain Cook himself, did not know how to swim. I want to say that again. They weren't required to learn how to swim in the Royal Navy, and so let alone get on these amazing boards and sail across the ocean. So when they describe it, it's like they can't believe. They have to almost break it down, like the biomechanics of how they get on the board, and it really is true, because they didn't think people back in England would even believe them. So we get first descriptions of that. We get also our first encounter with lomi lomi, which is Polynesian massage. Captain Cook himself was suffering on this third voyage from sciatica, an acute sciatica. And he was in excruciating pain. But he got to Tahiti. These masseuses descended upon him and wanted to work their magic on him, and he was very skeptical. He said, "No, I don't want to do that. That's no." And he didn't want to be touched. He's British, but he very reluctantly submitted himself to their ministrations, and they cured him of his problem. And he wrote about it very eloquently and enthusiastically in his journal, and you get this, this first kind of, it kind of takes off after that, Polynesian massage. We got our first description of a human sacrifice in Tahiti. We get descriptions of all sorts of other cultural things like tattooing, especially among the Maori in New Zealand. And Cook's men were fascinated by tattoos. They got tattoos. As far as I know, Cook himself did not, but many of his officers, many of his men did. And they went back to England and showed off their tattoos, and it went viral. And then it became this thing that all sailors have to do, is get a tattoo. And it's a tradition that continues to this day. So these are some of the things that you get with Captain Cook's voyages. So, when you write these kinds of books, primarily you're dealing with reading monographs, manuscripts, going to archives. It's very solitary. But there is a social aspect to the work that I was able to do on this book, and it started with this amazing organization called the Captain Cook Society, which I am a card-carrying member of. We call ourselves the Cookies. And I tell you this partly because genuinely I like to give credit to these amazing scholars who are out there, but also to give you a sense of the breadth and the depth of this subculture that exists in Cook world. It's like they're out there, they're all over the world. There's anthropologists and maritime historians, and people who collect stamps, and people who collect coins, and a lot of nerds and geeks, and people who are interested in ancient understandings of weather and currents and oh, you name it. And I was able, I think, to shorten by, considerably the research for my book by getting to know these amazing folks all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada, but really, truly everywhere. There are the people who collect relics and artifacts from Cook's voyages, including this spear that came from Cook's third voyage that I got to handle a little bit in Hawaii. They're out there, these people, and these artifacts are a little bit controversial because a lot of places in the world think they should be repatriated back to the countries to which they, where they came from, understandably, but they fetch huge sums of money at auction all over the world. There's also the collectors of rare books and manuscripts. Cook's voyages produced huge volumes, so much, many thousands of pages of, these beautiful leather-bound, folio-sized books. And this is a guy I got to meet in Maui named Lou Weinstein, who has this incredible, pristine collection of Cookiania, as it's called. And it's just incredible stuff. And, there is something special about holding a book that was published in 1784, like this, that is, beautifully published with beautiful engravings and maps and so forth that you can hold in your hands and sort of smell the history. It's just a wonderful, wonderful part of doing the research for these books. Okay, so Cook's third voyage was really designed, had many purposes, but the main purpose was to pursue this thing that had been the obsession of the British Empire for hundreds of years, the Northwest Passage. Finding a shortcut through all those crazy archipelagos of northern Canada that would get you from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean quickly, and avoid the long journey around South America or Africa, avoiding the Spanish and the Portuguese, and getting to the Orient where they could trade with China and India. So many people had died, so many people had suffered looking for this thing, which we all know in theory exists. In fact, in recent years, people have been able to travel through it many times. The ice is not what it used to be in the north, as we all know. But Cook's voyage was to look for this thing from the other side of the world, like go all the way around the North American continent, go up to what we now call Alaska, and to try to find it from the Pacific side, and travel somehow through all that stuff and get to England. While they thought it would go any better for them than it had for the previous explorers who had died of scurvy, and there was always the mutinies and all sorts of horrible things that had happened around Greenland, future United States. This time they were trying to get to it from this side. I'm sorry. So they leave in July of 1776 from Plymouth, two ships, the Resolution and the Discovery, and they're heading ultimately for Alaska. And as they do so, they're just missing the memo on this thing that was going on in Philadelphia. And what's cool and interesting is that they're gone for 4 years, and they never understood that this had happened, this event, the Declaration of Independence. And if they had waited a couple of more weeks, they would have learned about it, and I'm convinced that Captain Cook's voyage would have been halted, and Cook would have been sent to the Americas to put down the rebellion. Interesting kind of near miss of history to think about. A lot of people on this voyage. It's really not a biography of Captain Cook. It's really about all the people on this voyage, and it's almost a biography of a voyage. I like to describe it that way. But here's some of the people who are on the ship, on the ships. So the guy in the upper right is a famous explorer in his own right in future years, George Vancouver, who really explored the Pacific Northwest. He's a young midshipman on board the Resolution and is learning from Captain Cook, the great Captain Cook. And the guy in the bottom right is John Ledyard, an American who was from Connecticut, went to Dartmouth College, dropped out, and somehow ended up on the Resolution as a Marine. But he wrote this important book about the voyage, Captain Cook's final voyage, that became the first book to be copyrighted in the United States. So I draw from his journals a lot. And then the third guy, the guy on the left, is an insufferable guy that was hated by most everyone on board the ship and would become famous later in life for a certain mutiny that happened, the HMS Bounty. So this is William Bligh, a guy who was incredibly gifted as a sailor and a map maker himself, but was, he's one of those guys who's always right, but always the first to admit it. And it drove people crazy. And we get our first glimpses, I think, of the personality that will become William Bligh. Very difficult research. The struggle is real. We writers have to, we have to do the work. We can't just talk about it. Captain Cook did have an truly uncanny propensity for anchoring in beautiful places that were beautiful then and are still beautiful today, like this place in New Zealand. This is a place called Ship Cove in Queen Charlotte Sound on the South Island of New Zealand. One of many anchorages that Ann and I were lucky enough to go to doing research. It's just stunningly beautiful stuff. But they made many stops along the way. They stopped in a place called Kerguelen Islands. They went to Tasmania. They went to New Zealand. They went through the Cook Islands and Tonga and so forth. But they were all aiming for sort of the first lengthy stop they were going to make on the voyage was Tahiti. And Tahiti, I would say half the guys, and they were mostly young guys, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old on the voyage, they had signed up for this voyage primarily to find out whether the rumors were true about this extraordinary place, Tahiti, place with beautiful weather and beautiful landscape, beautiful, food, wonderful food, beautiful, friendly people, and especially beautiful women who, the stories at least were said that they were extremely, for some weird reason, willing. And it turned out all those rumors it seemed to be true for these guys. And I want to warn you, for those of you who may be kind of conservative, there's a lot of sex in my book. I tried to strike it out. I tried to understand it because how could these women have possibly found these stinky, smelly, hairy sailors attractive even for a second? I never could figure that out. But I do get into a little of what may have been going on in terms, there's certainly a more complicated narrative there about that aspect of the story. But there is, I had to turn what was essentially an X-rated story into a PG-13 movie, to understand this and make it palatable for my editor in New York. These are the stops that he made and that we made. It's certainly over touristed and overdeveloped now, but it is still an absolutely stunningly beautiful place. Captain Cook's stop in Tahiti was to replenish the ships and to give his men some rest and some R&R, but it was also to deal with another part of his mission, which had to do with this guy, who is a major character in the book. His name is Mai, and he was the first Polynesian to set foot on English soil. He came to England as part of Cook's second voyage around the world and had this amazing experience in England where he learned English. He was vaccinated for smallpox. He met King George III. He learned to hunt at the estates of the aristocrats, and it turned out he was a mean backgammon player, a chess player. He was a big hit among the ladies of England. He just had this very interesting experience and was written about a lot in the newspapers. And so I was able to really, build up his story as a major kind of secondary plot of the book, I guess you'd say. But after 2.5 years of being there, he was desperately homesick. He wanted to go home to Tahiti, and King George III said, "Okay, fine, we will get you there, and you know what? Captain Cook will take you home aboard his ship, the Resolution, along with all these different belongings that he had accumulated over these 2.5 years, including a full suit of armor and a jack-in-the-box and a globe of the world and Bibles and portraits of King George and Queen Charlotte. What else? Lots and lots of muskets and ammunition and swords, all this stuff, and a lot of animals, because King George wanted Tahiti to have animals, British farm animals, cows, horses, pigs. They already had pigs, but goats, sheep, peacocks, you name it. And so, unfortunately for Captain Cook, the Resolution and Discovery became essentially Noah's Ark. They had to transport all these animals all the way to the other side of the world to introduce a proper English, farm down there in Polynesia. Just before they left, in July of 1776, the most famous portrait painter in England, Sir Joshua Reynolds, painted this portrait, which is considered his masterpiece, Portrait of Omai. He loved it. He kept it in his house until he died. Somehow it was sort of lost to history for a while, but it was recently purchased by the Getty Museum in Los Angeles for $62 million. So Mai lives on. He's a famous guy, and you'll see this, Nick, if you ever go to Los Angeles to that amazing museum. So after leaving Mai in the Society Islands, Captain Cook heads north for Alaska, and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, kind of like in the middle of the Atlantic, there's Bermuda. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there happens to be this beautiful archipelago we call Hawaii, and he stumbles upon it. And he can't believe it because no one seemed to know about it. It wasn't on his charts. This is the island of Kauai, which is where he made landfall. He knew immediately this was an extraordinary find, and he really kind of wanted to just linger there and explore Hawaii. He does have a pretty extraordinary first contact experience with the Hawaiian people, the Kauaian people. Everything goes, for the most part, very well for him. He's there for just a little over a week. The Kauaians are fascinated by Cook and his men, and Cook and his men are fascinated by them. This is one of those first contact experiences that is so extraordinary. Like so many of these explorers of this time, they might have had 1 or 2 or 3 of these first contact moments. Cook had like 40 of them all over the world, and it was almost like his ships were drawn as if by magnetic attraction to islands all over the Pacific, including Hawaii. And it went for the most part very well. And Cook begins to think about a larger question, and he writes about it in his journal, which is, he could communicate with them. They spoke a language that was very similar to the languages that he had learned in the Society Islands, in New Zealand, in Easter Island, Tonga, all these places that he had now been to. He realizes these are the same people. This is the same culture. How did they do it? How did they get all over this vast area? And, we talk about the Bermuda Triangle, but there's also the, Polynesian Triangle and the Polynesian diaspora, as we call it. And the question of how did they populate and, migrate across these vast distances. And you get in Cook's journals the very first sort of questionings about that, like what kind of animals did they put on board their ships? How did they build their canoes without metal, without rivets? How did they, follow, and because it became apparent, these weren't just accidental driftings, these were deliberate migrations. They must have been following the birds and the marine mammals and the currents and the stars. He as an explorer who had been to all these places, started to recognize the magnitude of their accomplishment in a way that had never really been, realized before. He's also fascinated by ship architecture. Wherever he goes, how did they do it? Because the British had their way, but the Polynesians certainly had theirs as well. So they make landfall, they move on and make landfall in current day Oregon at a place called Cape Foulweather. Cook names all sorts of things after he's very literal. The weather was foul that day. They work their way up the entire coast. This is the map that he and his officers produced from that summer season of 1778, where we get the first kind of contours of what it really looks like up there, and not the cartoonishly inaccurate maps that were given to him by the Admiralty that had been produced by the Bering expeditions. So they work their way up this way. They go through the Aleutian Islands. They work their way up through the Bering Straits and so forth. But this again is kind of Captain Cook's real specialty, is coming up, in this case, on the fly. They aren't stopping. They're moving fast along the coastline. He's able to kind of get this quite accurate. I mean, it's got its flaws. It's not perfect, but it's our first glimpse of what Alaska really looks like. So my wife and I and some of my family, we followed that trajectory up the way. We went to Nootka Sound on Vancouver Island. Great place, a beautiful place where we met the last living Yuquot First Nations person who was, he was extremely friendly and wonderful, wasn't he? But he didn't have very many kind things to say about Captain Cook and his men, but worked our way up to Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula, and then Cook Inlet, which leads almost to the location of Anchorage, present-day Anchorage. Cook and his men then went up through the Bering Strait, where they began to encounter more and more ice until they finally encountered sort of an impenetrable wall of ice and realized that they were not going to sail to England, up and over Canada, at least not that year. What they encountered was a polar bear and walrus and an impenetrable wall of ice that could very nearly entrapped he and his ships in this, which would have, we would never have heard from them again. At this point, I think Captain Cook would have said, most captains would have said, good enough, let's go home. 3.5 years, we've been at sea, it's too dangerous. There is no Northwest Passage, it's just ice up here. But Cook said, now we, with the benefit of hindsight, know it was probably a poor decision, that we will come back next summer and do it all over again, in case the ice is better next year. And so what he decides to do is to go south, to spend the winter in a warm place, a place that he had experienced, on his way north, Kauai and Hawaii, the Hawaiian archipelago. And so he goes, 5,000 miles all the way south to Hawaii to spend the winter and to give his men a little more R&R. So he arrives in Hawaii and goes to this amazing place, which is the big island of Hawaii. It's a place called Kealakekua Bay. It's a sacred place on the Kona coast. And this is where he, just through serendipity, happened to make landfall during the height of this incredible festival. It's called the Makahiki, that celebrates the god Lono. And as he arrives, he and his two ships arrive in this bay, there are many thousands of people in the water, on the shore. It's a time of rapture and time of just, you're supposed to set aside your weapons and your wars and celebrate. And they start calling him Lono. They bring him ashore and bow down to him. They bring him into the temple, which is dedicated to the god Lono. And it becomes the centerpiece of this festival that is, seems to be dedicated to him. This is where things get a little complicated. Captain Cook seems to kind of acquiesce in this veneration. He seems to go along with it. But things go very well for his men. For a couple of weeks, they have the time of their lives, almost like Tahiti. They eat well, and they're doing quite well. And Captain Cook begins to overstay his welcome and decides, all right, I do need to leave now. I can sense it. And he leaves. Unfortunately, 2 days later, his ships encounter a gale, and his foremast snaps in half, and he has to turn back around and go back to this same bay to have his ships repaired. And at that moment, everything has changed. The Hawaiians are like, "What are you doing here?" If they ever thought he had been the god Lono, they knew that he wasn't now. They're like, "You're a god out of season. The Makahiki is over. The festival's done. We're back to regular life." And everything changed after that. And so I always just say, I don't know how many of you had a chance to read the book, but the last 50, 60 pages are about what happens next. The sort of unraveling of relations, the escalation of misunderstandings and miscues, and cultural collisions that go on in rapid succession that lead to this scene, which is it's a moment of cultural collision that has been documented in poems and plays, in operas, in all sorts of books and novels, and painted by many great painters, to try to understand how did this sort of most disciplined, for the most part, a very disciplined British explorer, how did he come to this scene where he was bashed and hacked to death on the lava flats of this sacred place in Hawaii. I won't tell you that because I want you to read the book and buy the book, hopefully, because we're going to have some. I think we're going to have some signing afterwards. But that is the kind of the last 50 pages of the book to kind of tell the story of what happened on Hawaii and how we got to this moment. I think we have some time for some questions, and we have some microphones here as well. So I'd love to hear from you. But that's the story of the Wide Sea. Thank you so much.